Okay, well, went to Rick Obermeyer's memorial service yesterday in Orlando, and as good to see guys who I knew as teenagers, now they're gray-haired old men like I am. I knew them when they were teenagers. Now they're in their 50s, 60s, 70s. But anyway, as we were leaving, uh, Debbie said, had the mug collection from Rick, so everybody take a mug with them. So I picked one up. It's uh, Ross Allen, Ross Allen Silver Springs Annual Boy Scout Camp. Ross Allen was a naturalist at Silver Springs from like the 1930s. I think he left in 1969. Tried to make his own park. I remember seeing him in 1979 with my scout troop at the alligator St. Augustine alligator farm, and he tried to make another wildlife park when he passed away. In the park was in Lake City, and he passed away in 1982. But Ross Allen was a naturalist, was it Steve Irwin, and Corwin, and those guys. Uh, Ross Allen was an earlier generation of that. And his family was actually Creek Indian too. Not too many people know that. Um, but I know some of his relatives, which is how I know that. But moving on, I had a question and answer or a video where I wanted to do a question and answer, and I got some questions. And so I want to answer those, but the previous video, I'm taking it down so nobody keeps on asking questions. I put videos up and I'll have people say something or remark on something from 11 years ago, and I don't know what the heck they were talking about. So I don't like people commenting about something that was made years ago. So I'm going to answer the ones in this video. So I'll just keep the virtual background of Fort Christmas here. And I had a question from Michael Knight, 5732. Well, a few of them actually. Says he's from South Florida, Boynton Beach, Palm Beach County. Asks anything to note in the area during the Seminole Wars. He knows about the Battle of Waxahachie and anything in Fort Lauderdale. Well, yes, there is. And there are several skirmishes around Fort Lauderdale. Um, Not too many that were of any significance, but there was one on Pine Island that was Abiaka or Sam Jones Village, where Sam Jones led the people away in hiding. And there's an exhibit at Treetops Park in Davie. I think the park might go by another name. And there's a statue of Sam Jones done by the Cooley father and son, put there about 1995, 96. And the same statue is in front of the Atafaki Museum. And I remember going there for the dedication. And there's a talk also in the same area between Sam Jones and Colonel Harney, where Harney was accusing Sam Jones of raiding his camp at Cape Coral, and Sam Jones denied it and said with the Spanish Indians. Well, Colonel Harney actually found out that Sam Jones was speaking the truth later on when Colonel Harney, as dragoon soldiers, raided Chicaga's camp and found a boat that Harney's command had, and some of the repeating rifles and all that, but nothing as big as the Battle of Waxahachie. Also in Jupiter Inlet, Palm Beach County, there's the Lighthouse Museum. That's worth visiting. Has some Seminole stuff there. There's a historical marker for the military trail at the corner of Military Trail and Indian Town Road. There's a statue of Major William Lauderdale. Major Lauderdale and the Tennessee Volunteers actually cut the trail that became Military Trail, which is a roadway today of the same name. There's a historical marker for the Cooley Massacre on Brickell Drive. There's a monument, already said that. And the Fort Lauderdale Historical Society Museum is supposed to have some exhibits, but I've not been able to go there because either I haven't gotten there when it was open or was not able to find it easily. Um, but that's kind of what's around Fort Lauderdale, Seminole County. And if you look in the comments below, I'll have a link to the Seminole War Heritage Trail, which is places all over the state that you can visit connected to the Seminole War. So that's good. Here's Tony 207 says he's from Florida and he has a few questions. What's the difference between the Florida Maroons and Black Seminoles? Um, the definition has changed on that. Um, Originally, Maroons were the Black people and mixed heritage in Jamaica, and Maroon is from like a Creole, maybe Arawak word. Um, and there was a slave revolt in Jamaica in the late 1700s that the British brutally suppressed with bloodhounds. And if you look in the Seminole War, there's one newspaper article that was reprinted everywhere else about the comparing the Maroon War and the Seminole War to each other and advocating the use of bloodhounds. And that was about 1838, 39. Found that on newspaper.com. But during the Seminole War, there's no mention of Maroons in any of the historical documents. Um, of course, I shouldn't say no mention. I mean, there might be the word used somewhere, but I can't find the word used at all in the eyewitness accounts and the reports. Nowadays, it's used for talking about the Black Seminoles. Now, when we had our convocation in Jupiter 2 years ago, a Seminole tribe and Seminole Nation, they said they don't have a such thing as what's called Black Seminoles. You're either Seminole or you're not Seminole. You can be a Black Seminole, a Red Seminole, a White Seminole, or a Rainbow Seminole. It doesn't matter. Uh, the skin color doesn't matter to them. So you're either a tribal member or non-tribal member. That's all the difference they see. Second question from Tony, what's the history between the free blacks and natives in Miccosukee, Florida and Suwannee County, Florida before and after Andrew Jackson? Uh, I know some of this has been written in the Florida Historical Quarterly, but just quick, it's a good question, needs more information uncovered. Town of Miccosukee has several periods of history beginning in the mid 1700s as refugee of Chehaw, Hidgety, and other Upper Creek towns coming into the area. So it's a large refugee population. Survey done at the time showed that 90% were women and children. So a lot of the men were either off on the warpath or even killed. Then it was Kenhaji's town when William Augustus Bowles was in the area from 1795 to 1803. Kenhaji was an ally to William Augustus Bowles. Then the town received the refugees from the Horseshoe Bend around 1814, and it was finally destroyed, put to the fire by Andrew Jackson in 1818. At the time, from what they counted, the population of Miccosukee was larger than St. Augustine and Pensacola combined. It was actually the largest town in Florida. What we're calling Suwannee, it could be Old Town, Nero's Town, or Bull Lake's Town. Near today, Old Town, it became a major settlement of free blacks, especially those who fled Prospect Bluff. When Prospect Bluff, also known as Negro Fort, was blown up by the Americans in 1816. Jackson also burned the town in 1818. Yes, it did have mixed towns and mixed populations. Nearby was Bull Eggs or Bullock Town. He was the brother of King Payne. He was, I think, more the war chief. King Payne was more the peace side or the white chief. Third question from Tony, who was John Caesar? John Caesar was like you had Abraham was the aide or sense keeper of Micanopy, kind of like Abraham was the Secretary of State to Micanopy. Well, John Caesar was kind of the same, but to King Philip of the Miccosukes. Well, somebody had remarked that they have descendants of King Philip and Seminole Nation. Yes, they do. Just I call them Miccosukee because over here in Florida, the Miccosukee tribe claims them as Miccosukee. They married into either tribe. But John Caesar or Caesar was a black leader. Not much is known about him, mainly because he was killed in 1837 after a raid on the Hanson plantation. Killed during that raid, Colonel Hanson and the militia from St. Augustine trailed Caesar and his warriors back to their camp and fired and killed several of them sitting around the fire, Caesar being one of them. There's an article written by Ken Porter in the Journal of Negro History from 1946, and I'll leave a link down below citing that article. I'm not sure where you might be able to find it. I found it on JSTOR. You may be able to get access to the journal through your local library. According to Porter, Caesar was about 60 years old. He had a wife among those plantations in St. Augustine. He's therefore probably more active in getting the slaves to rise up and revolt against their masters. And he was certainly an unsung hero getting the slaves freed from the plantations, probably more so than what Abraham did. And fourth question from Tony, is there any connection between Seminoles and pirates? Yes, there is. If you consider William Augustus Bowles, who is a Maryland Tory, who deserted in Pensacola during the Revolutionary War and joined some Creeks in the area. William Augustus Bowles, later on, he became the self-styled chief and general director of the Free State of Muskogee. He had several British allies and Spanish Indians under him, and they're called pirates and banditis there. And he had three ships that he actually raided the Spanish at one point. You also have the Spanish Indians under Chicaica, who also may have connection to the pirates. They're actually seems like they're actually more peaceful than they've been credit for. It's a fun question, and there's definitely been contact with them because there were pirates on the Gulf Coast, and if they were on the Gulf Coast, they had contact and trade with the natives. So, just saying. And one more question by Tony. What's the status of Fort Gadsden or Prospect Bluff, Negro Fort, whatever you want to call it? There's an annual gathering on Memorial Day weekend of descendants of the settlement of Prospect Bluff. I went there for the last one. I've not heard when the park's going open full time yet. I have heard it might be open on the weekends. It might be best to call the Apalachicola National Forest or check their website. Don't go right now in September. It's just too hot and miserable this time of year. The first time I went, in fact, was Labor Day weekend in 1993, and the bugs pretty much chased me off after about 5 minutes. The deer flies can get very bad this time of year. I think the latest issue they're having is they're needing a site host or caretaker to stay there. They do have special tours. But anyway, let's go to the next question. Michael Kalinsko. Oh, sorry, Michael Kalinski 7998 asks, when was Wildcat captured and escorted by William Tecumseh Sherman out of Fort Pierce? On what date? There's a good article in the Florida Historical Quarterly, which I'll put in the notes down below. Volume 71, issue 1, page 56. Saying that was summer of 1841. Then on a website, I found it gives it actual date of May 1st, 1841. I'll go with that. That's within the ballpark. Coacoochee or Wildcat, he was a prisoner by July. And July 4th, he was a prisoner on the ship in Tampa Bay when they're celebrating Independence Day. That John T. Sprague, in his book, The Origin, Progress, and Conclusion of the Florida War, talks about. But there's a good article in the Florida Historical Quarterly, which I'll put in the notes down below. Next question, or Creature Caldwell 9858, and then he starts answering questions of other people. He says Maroons and Black Seminoles are the same thing. Maroon is the word the Spanish used, and Seminoles is a Spanish word altered from Cimarrones. Well, see above, Maroons is from Jamaica. It's originally what the French and the British used, not the Spanish. And Black Seminoles, really, they're called Black Seminoles during the Seminole War. They're not called Maroons. Is Black Seminoles is a word that's not used too often during the Seminole War. It's in the Maroons is in the Florida territorial laws, and I saw Black Seminoles in some of the eyewitness accounts. Maroon is more a racial designation as far as I'm concerned. It's a conglomerate people that don't necessarily have the same culture or background. Seminole is more of an ethnic or tribal designation. It's people of the fire of the square ground who are descendants of the mound building culture. They're simply different people, been in the same area, got tangled up in the same war. The Seminoles started actually calling themselves in the late 1700s, before there's the United States. And I found that in a paper that I'm going to list below, Creek Schism, Seminole Genesis Revisited by Philip Hawkins, 2009, a paper he did at USF. It's on Digital Commons. I actually found a copy that doesn't have a paywall, so I'll put the link below. It's a very good paper and very well researched where the word Seminole came from. Next question, I didn't mark down who it was asking, asked about the earliest reference or mention of Abraham. The earliest one that we seem to find is 1826, when he was employed as a translator for Chief John Hickser Tecosio on a trip to Washington, D.C. He was not used as a translator for the Treaty of Moultrie Creek in 1823. The treaty for that treaty was Stephen Richards, who lived near Blountstown. Abraham is mentioned, with this 1826 affairs, he's mentioned the Indian Affairs papers, the National Archives, and microfilm rolls. We have copies in the State Library in Tallahassee, and it's also on Ancestry. It seems possible that, piecing together information, bits that Abraham kind of said, or some of the speculation seems that he was born about 1790. He survived the destruction of Negro Fort or Prospect Bluff. He was possibly trained by the British Royal Marines at Prospect Bluff, and he was captured, one of the few survivors. He was let go and he went to Old Town from there and ended up, they called him a slave of Micanopy. That makes sense if Old Town is next to Bullockstown. Bullock or Bullegs is brother of King Payne. Micanopy is their nephew. There's also one more Abraham that I found reference to, was born about the same time. It makes it a little confusing in the Indian Affairs papers. People putting in court claims to reclaim escaped slaves. There's a woman who fled and joined the Seminoles in the late 1700s, and the slave owner was trying to get her back, even though she escaped during Spanish time. And so you have the same name, same age, both in Florida. It makes it a little tricky trying to sort through who is who. And so, what we know before 1826 is just some guesswork and speculating on what we have. Um, and that's what we know. Definitely one of the most famous uh, Black Seminoles or Maroons or Blacks or whatever you want to call them. Abraham, one of the most famous, I think. Here's a question, several questions from JK DP6YE, uh, asking how much would I guess was undocumented, such as small skirmishes or loss of small supply, boat loaded with decent amount of supplies, asking several questions. Well, as far as documenting battles, I've been doing that for 30 years. So in my book, I put together the battles. I pretty much found all of them. It's sometimes a skirmish or a battle. Might not be more than somebody taking a few shots at each other. So it depends on what you want to actually count as a skirmish or a battle. There was one thing I really didn't count as much as skirmish when soldiers got to Coacoochee Prairie and firing at some Seminoles escaping, and they fired back and took off, and that was it. And I don't know if that really counts for a skirmish. They're just trading shots at each other, and it's not really a battle. It seems the information's out there. It's just waiting for us to find it. We find new things every year. I thought we were done finding things about Major Dade. And then a few years ago, in fact, about the time Frank passed away, I found out that Major Dade had a second daughter who died as an infant and is buried, I think, in Fredericksburg. It seems, and they said, it seems that hobbyists find many artifacts with serial documentation from the War Department. Not sure what you mean by artifacts or documentation. Uh, those are different things. So um, I I know in the past some hobbyists, go metal detecting or stuff. Once something's taken out of ground, it has zero archaeological value. You can't tell any more about it once it comes out of the ground, except maybe identify what it is. Let's see, as far as asks if is there a protocol for a large amount of ammo or ammunition lost? Yes, there would be. It would be written up in the quartermaster records, there with the National Archives microfilm, or in the fort log book. When a fort is abandoned on the post returns, you'll see them marking how much ammunition or whatever they have left because quartermaster records officers have to sign for and sign them over to the next officer in charge. And okay, asking about alcohol bottles if they're found, and endless military buttons when there's no bell. Well, talking about two different things. There's a lot of mention uh, in the record, in the letters, Indian Affairs and Adjutant records of, and in fact, what was it? Thompson, Wiley Thompson calls them whiskey doggeries. And I think Jessup mentions whiskey doggeries being around army posts or whiskey peddlers. There's one report said the whiskey peddlers outnumbered the civilians around Micanopy that Bennett Riley wrote about. Uh, so wherever there were soldiers, the people who took advantage of the army falling came uh, close behind them. As far as buttons, those come off. They can come off easily. I know from experience. I worked at Fort Morgan, Alabama for 2.5 years, and at least no less than 3 times a week, I'd be in the reenactor coat, Civil War or 1830s, and when you're wearing those jackets nonstop, you're re-sewing buttons on them all the time. It wears out. They also didn't have good polyester thread that we have nowadays there. So they would tend to pop off. It's interesting that buttons would be recycled because in Florida, we've constantly found buttons not only 1830 Seminole War, but as early as War of 1812 buttons. And so kind of interesting. Occasionally you'll find they find Navy or Marines buttons. Asking, summing up, was your learned knowledge of lost items or how often happening or any reporting needed? Uh, Not everything's written down, but it's uh, no, it, it's scattered everywhere. You have to look for the records. It could end up anywhere in a personal journal or letters or family letters. Post settlers would have record of what they would have, would be in Indian Affairs when they're contracting with the Army or in the adjutant letters, uh, what they would be contracting to sell. So, you'll never know where you'll find it. Oh, continuing on the questions. How on earth did they make military roads in the unforgiving Florida weather and deep underbrush in the good amount of time? A lot of backbreaking work. Many of these soldiers were farmers in Ireland and Poland, and that was all they did all their life. They were workhorses themselves. Company would be detailed for prisoners to work on the road for the month, and you can see in the post returns, 12 soldiers and an officer are detailed to work on the road, and they go off and do that. It takes a long time. There's a few roads that you'll read about in adjutant papers that actually took years to build. So how many men were used and how many up and fled? Well, usually a dozen would be kind of the minimum, sometimes a company of men. Interesting, on the post returns also have monthly returns of how many would desert during the month. And when they would capture them or when they gave up, they would put that in the monthly return too, said two deserted and two others were apprehended, or there's like one deserted and two apprehended from the previous month. There, also you'll find those in the adjutant letters and the post returns. He says it's amazing how a day's march to another fort yet to be built would have been cleared for wagons and many bridges built in such a short time. It is amazing. And most of the work went on in 1838 and 1839. General Jessup was a logistics officer, and he understood what needed to be done. And it was only accelerated under Zachary Taylor, who built over 800 miles of roads in Florida or something like that. It's in Dr. Mann's book or John T. Sprague's book, how many bridges were built and causeways and roads and forts only to be abandoned soon after. uh, so it is amazing. Once they were built or established, the roads weren't often more than, if you ever hike the Appalachian Trail, aren't much more than that. They're just a goat path. But once you open up a road, everyone starts coming through. And there's even some roads that you could tell where the wagons went through with the ruts there. So anyway, that's all I have for the questions. Maybe we'll do this again sometimes. Sorry, that was the way I was reading. Kind of looks like I have my eyes closed, but I'm an old guy. So um, and maybe we can do that again sometime. And hopefully I got under an hour because I like to do videos and not drag them out too long. And I thought those were really good questions. And we'll do that another time. And keep putting questions in the comments of the videos. I'll try answer that as well. Thank you.